Happy New Year to you, but I must start slightly differently, Rupert, because before we talk about Musk and everything else, a council has been criticised today for telling its staff not to ask people for their Christian name. This is Sutton Council. Mr. Lowe in South London has said that the question could be offensive in what has been branded hypersensitivity taken to ridiculous lengths. Are you all right with us calling you Rupert, Mr. Lowe?
I mean, I'm delighted that you call me by my Christian name. I would be upset if you called me by anything else. And frankly, I think all of us have had enough of this poppycock that's been going on sort of throughout both national government and local government. I mean, they need to just sharpen up, wake up and start behaving with a bit of common sense and a bit of logic, really.
Honestly, mate, to me, it becomes more simple on a daily basis. Common sense has to be it. Reform talk, all these places. I don't understand it. It's offensive to call somebody by their name. What are we going to get to? Let's get to it, Rupert. So much. Listen, can we just talk Musk quickly? I mean, he thinks you're fantastic, Elon Musk. What's that? Are you still all right with Nige? I mean, Nige isn't going, oh, horrible you, everything's fine, right? What's going on?
I put out a good statement, Jeremy. I mean, the fact that Elon Musk likes some of my tweets is a matter of pride. I love that. And I think it doesn't do reform any harm to have people like Elon Musk, who's arguably the most entrepreneurial entrepreneur on the planet, you know, who is following what we're doing. And I think he's clearly got, correctly, an issue with the lack of an inquiry into the grooming gangs. And what's been happening throughout a lot of our sort of northern and Midlands towns, and indeed in my hometown, Oxford, it's been happening there as well. So I think we want an inquiry, we want to know the facts, and frankly, as you know, I think anyone who's perpetrated these heinous crimes should be, if they're a foreign national, they should be deported, and I think it's vile what's been happening.
Mate, I am so with you. And actually, somebody said something to me. I know Nigel today has accused West Reading of covering up the truth. I don't even call them grooming gangs. I call them rape gangs. I think he's an absolute stain on our society. I fear I'm completely with you about foreign nationals. I'm also completely with you.
I called them rape gangs in Parliament, and I think a lot of the virtue-signalling do-gooders got upset by the fact they said the language was too strong. Well,
really? Well, try telling that to an 8-year-old who's been raped by 4 or 5 men. These people are ridiculous. They need to get their heads out of Westminster and see what's going on. So with you, Rupert. And here's the other thing as well. I mean, I said to somebody earlier on this show, this is the United Kingdom, right? Where the Archbishop of Canterbury's had to go for covering up paedophilia in the church. You've got Hugh Edwards and all his cronies who don't even go to jail for looking at vile images. I fear that these rape gangs, grooming gangs, whatever, as you quite rightly said, are spread across this country in far greater numbers. But what concerns me as a father is that this has been covered up for years. And I'm with you about heinous crime. But I don't know how high this goes or how deep this goes, but this is a disgrace. This is a United Kingdom.
That's why we need an inquiry, Jeremy, and not a sort of an inquiry that skates over the surface. Yeah. I think we want a proper inquiry that has all the drains up. And if this has been happening, whatever the reason it's been hidden, whether it's, you know, a bloc Asian vote which is supporting Labour, whether it's a fear of being called racist, I think what we want is the drains up. We want all the facts out there, and then the British public can judge for themselves. As you know, I'm an advocate for transparent government, and I think what we've got here is a very opaque situation that needs the light shone in on it.
I think it needs completely the light shone on it. I mean, we've got a Prime Minister who presumably is concerned about losing the Muslim vote. I don't understand, and maybe this is a step too far for some people at 4:30 in the afternoon. I don't sit here and imagine that everything is down to a certain colour, creed or race, but I certainly would love to hear from some Muslim leaders and people. I've spoken to many Muslims who say this is a disgrace and people need to come out and say that in their number. But for me as a society, it's an absolute disgrace and I need to sort it out. Let's talk about this government then, Mr. Lowe. Rupert, I'm joking. Keir Starmer spent many years saying that the Tories had messed up, and we all know that the British public had stopped listening to the Tories because they became a sort of centrist version of Labour, I felt, which is why I voted for reform, and so many people had always voted for the Tory party did, because you talked about the things as a party that I was brought up on, which was low taxation, a strong military, not a fear of, you know, crime, but police, men and women on the streets, etc., etc. We've talked about the cancellation of you know, the winter heating bills. We've talked about all that. today we discovered this government that can't lower taxes and in fact lied and raises them is standing by for public spending cuts that will be ruthless and will impact still further on services and thus people who are really struggling. And it's almost like this country's swallowed the biggest con in the world, Rupert, isn't it?
I think whatever you want to call her, Rachel from accounts or Rachel from complaints or Rachel from the Japanese desk, whatever she was, whatever CV she chooses to bring out of the cupboard today, you know, I think it's the worst budget I've ever seen.
Yep.
They clearly are. They're all economic chalk jockeys, and you know what a chalk jockey is. It's somebody who's never ridden a horse before,
Yep.
so his name's up in chalk. So these people have got no idea about running a business, a country, or any other form of economic unit. The budget, I mean, she talks about regulating for growth, which is an oxymoron. The economy is effectively collapsing. Our incoming is a sterling crisis. The bond vigilantes are now going to be holding us to ransom, quite correctly. Who would want to invest in a country where you take over, you raise the wages for all the public sector, you hammer the private sector with a £40 billion tax increase, and then you expect the economy to grow? I mean, it's sort of kindergarten stuff which is doomed to fail. And I had lunch at a bank today. I mean, London's losing its position as a centre of capital formation. It's lost out to America. Once you lose your position of a sort of liquidity-driven fundraising centre, it's very difficult to get it back, Jeremy. So I think she's got to make massive cuts in the public sector. As we know, there are more and more people in the public sector and they're less and less efficient. So it doesn't mean that there's less efficiency, but they've got to actually now, you know, take the bull by the horns and actually cut these indolent civil servants out and start to bring some logic to the way in which these people are supposed to be serving the electorate. They are servants after all.
I mean, that's for me, that's a really interesting point, because, I mean, I've run a business too, not on your scale, but to me, to say to the private sector, you know, forget your ideas, your creativity, creating jobs and success and wealth petering down. No, we're going to hammer you, but we're going to give every single person who's part of a public sector that is bloated by anybody's standards and is not up to scratch, because most of them are working from home or they're suffering from anxiety so they can't go to work anymore. They go on and on about this 22 billion black hole and then give the train drivers and their buddies who got them there this ridiculous rise. Fiscally, I think they've been an absolute shambles. And frankly, when I look again at this country at the end of a week of doing this show, and I think about rape gangs and I think about fiscally where we are and where we are in the world and all this, it's an absolute disgrace. And somebody sent me a text last week, this will make you laugh. It said, Donald Trump gets voted in America and he says that I'm going to make the lives of Americans more prosperous, I'm going to make it safer, I'm going to make us be appreciated for the money that we spend on everybody else, fair play to him. And then it said, can you imagine the uproar if we got somebody in this country like Nigel Farage to do the same? Absolutely, that's what we need, isn't it?
Exactly. Well, I mean, when a government minister looks you in the eye, which happened to me, and tells me that very often the state is more efficient than the private sector, at that point I sort of threw my hands up and walked out. I mean, if they honestly think that, Jeremy, we've got very little chance of succeeding. And ultimately, we've got the most entrepreneurial people. We've just got to cut away all of the fetters, all of the rules, the regulations, and all the unnecessary sort of rubbish that we get from all of these quangos that are unelected. And we've got to set the British people free. But in the meantime, you know, the currency will go on collapsing until we start to get some sensible policies which drive growth. And it's only through growth that we can solve the problems that we've got. We can't solve it if the economy doesn't grow.
No, it won't solve itself. The economy is screwed under this government. Where does it end with this government? Today we hear 500,000 people lying on hospital trolleys. No 999 calls being answered because the NHS, even at 200 billion plus, is apparently on its backside. I have very strong feelings about that. But something that actually Lord Vasey said just now to me was he doesn't think there's a plan. He doesn't think there's any foresight. It's almost day-to-day management and you know, beat it. It's a bit like whack-a-mole. It's just a ridiculous whack-a-mole politics where I'll deal with that, then I'll deal with that. I don't know if Starmer's got a plan. I don't feel like there's any ideology behind... Well, there is ideology, just no sort of practical knowledge of what to do to combat what's taking place, Rupert.
I think, Jeremy, and I got some knowledge of the NHS. I mean, I'm on record as saying this before. The NHS is a fraud. Everybody's told it's free. It's not free. We all pay for it through our national insurance. It's a bit like our state pension is a fraud. I mean, it's a put and take pension scheme which relies on those people who are working to pay for those people who've retired. And that works fine when you've got more people working than retiring. But now the baby boomers are all retiring. The government knows they've got an actuarial issue, and ultimately it means those young people will be working a lot longer and probably ending up with a pension much later than the current generation. Yep. And equally with the NHS, most people are now actually not only paying their national insurance because of immigration and because of the pressures that are on the NHS, most people now are being forced to go private. That's why it's a fraud, because they're paying twice. And, you know, until the whole thing is disassembled and reassembled and we actually prioritise frontline care and we sort out all of these issues and we get back to some proper sort of GP surgeries that function and a population that isn't being boosted all the time by needless mass legal and illegal immigration, then we're going to go on struggling. And I don't see Wes Streeting, even though I think he is a man who's clearly driven to try and improve things. I think he'll find it incredibly difficult to do that.
Rupert, final question. Would a reform government ask the British people to pay for medical care in terms of improving the NHS?
Well, personally, I think we should be allowed to opt out of the NHS and have some form of, scheme where we buy our own healthcare and take ourselves out of the NHS. There's a lot of ways in which you can actually solve the NHS. As we know, Jeremy, central planning never has and never will work. And what the NHS now is a centrally planned beast. It's like an animal on the back of productive Britain, and it's killing us. So somebody's got to grasp the nettle and sort it out. So personally, I think my view of life is not always the same as others. I want to empower people to take control of their own lives. I don't want a dependency culture, which effectively is what Gordon Brown tried to create, hoping that they'd always vote Labour.
You know what, my friend, I could damn well talk to you and forever. I'm so grateful. I know you're a busy man. You put the case so brilliantly. And Rupert, happy to be called Rupert as well, with me about the Christian name thing. Rupert Lowe.